My name is Natalie, 33 years old, and I work as an independent financial auditor. My parents handed my sister a Mediterranean cruise ticket worth $36,000 for Thanksgiving. Then my mother slid a cheap envelope across the table to me containing a $2 scratch-off lottery ticket. They laughed, calling me a lonely cubicle worker who needed a miracle to find a husband. They stopped laughing a few weeks later when they lost their house to a private equity firm, entirely unaware that the firm's sole owner was me, using the exact $67 million I won from their joke of a gift. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to watch your family reward toxic behavior while treating your hard work like a joke. The sharp clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal wine glass echoed through the formal dining room. My father Gregory stood at the head of the table, his face flushed with wine and self-importance. The Thanksgiving spread before us was entirely excessive. From where I sat at the far end of the table, my mind automatically cataloged the expenses. The imported truffles, the artisanal roasted turkey, the vintage wine flowing freely into every glass except mine. As a financial auditor, I cannot help but look at the world through a lens of ledgers and balance sheets. I knew exactly how much this dinner cost, just as I knew the underlying fragility of my parents' carefully constructed wealthy facade. The upscale suburban house we were sitting in, with its cathedral ceilings and custom crown molding, was a monument to their obsession with status. For years, I had watched them prioritize the appearance of success over actual stability, pouring money into luxury cars and country club memberships, while their credit card debts quietly spiraled out of control. But tonight was supposed to be a celebration of family gratitude. Instead, the air in the room felt thick and suffocating, vibrating with the usual unspoken tension that accompanied every family gathering. To my father's right sat my younger sister Vanessa. At 30 years old, she was the undisputed golden child of the family, practically glowing in a silk dress that I recognized from a high-end boutique catalog. Next to her was her husband DeAndre, a 32-year-old African-American stockbroker whose aggressive arrogance filled the room even when he was not speaking. DeAndre leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine with a practiced ease, playing the role of the wildly successful son-in-law that my parents so desperately wanted to parade in front of their friends. Gregory cleared his throat, commanding the attention of everyone at the table. My mother Cynthia sat across from him, beaming with anticipation, her hands clasped tightly together. I want to take a moment to express how incredibly proud we are of our family. Gregory began, his booming voice bouncing off the high ceilings. This year has been magnificent, especially for Vanessa and DeAndre. We all know how hard you two have been working, closing those massive deals and expanding your portfolio. You represent the very best of our family legacy. Vanessa offered a practiced, modest smile, while DeAndre nodded, slowly absorbing the praise as if it were his birthright. Gregory reached into the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, embossed envelope with a gold seal. He walked around the table and handed it to Vanessa. Your mother and I wanted to give you something special this year to celebrate your outstanding success, Gregory said. Open it. Vanessa tore the seal with manicured fingernails and pulled out a glossy travel itinerary. She gasped a high-pitched sound of manufactured delight and covered her mouth with her hand. A $36,000 VIP Mediterranean luxury cruise. She read the details aloud, her voice carrying an edge of smug satisfaction. 2 weeks in the royal suite. Private excursions in Greece and Italy. Dad, Mom, this is absolutely incredible. DeAndre let out a loud, booming laugh and clapped my father on the shoulder. Thanks, Gregory. This is exactly what we needed. I just locked in some massive margin trades last week, crushing the market as usual. A guy needs a break from dominating the financial sector. You know how it is. High risk, high reward. It takes a certain kind of relentless drive to stay at the top. He cast a sidelong glance down the table at me, his smile morphing into a patronizing smirk. Not everyone can handle the pressure. Some people are just built for the safe, boring 9 to 5 corporate grind. Right, Natalie? I sat perfectly still, my hands resting in my lap. I did not take the bait. As an auditor, I spent my days dissecting the lies people told with their money. I knew exactly what DeAndre was. I recognized the desperate overcompensation of a man playing a dangerous game with margin accounts, pretending to be a Wall Street titan while likely balancing on a house of cards. But my parents hung on his every word, nodding enthusiastically at his financial jargon, treating his reckless gambling as sheer genius. I remained silent, looking down at my plate. The isolation I felt was not new. It was a familiar heavy coat I wore to every family event. I had spent my entire adult life making responsible choices. I paid off my own student loans by working 60-hour weeks. I saved a 20% down payment for my own modest apartment without a single dime of help from the people sitting at this table. Yet in their eyes, my stability was a flaw. My independence was an insult to their chaotic image-obsessed lifestyle. I took a slow sip of water, waiting for the inevitable moment when their attention would turn on me. The moment came with the serving of dessert. My mother Cynthia stood up, smoothing the front of her expensive designer dress, holding a thin, cheap-looking envelope. She walked to my end of the table and slid it across the polished mahogany surface. It stopped right next to my half-eaten slice of pumpkin pie. There was no gold seal on this one. It was just a plain white envelope, the exact kind you buy in bulk at the local dollar store. I picked it up, feeling the distinct lack of weight in my hand. I opened the flap and pulled out the contents. It was a single Mega Millions scratch-off lottery ticket. The price printed clearly on the top right corner was exactly $2. I stared at the brightly colored cardboard, a jarring contrast to the elegant crystal and silver decorating the dinner table. I looked up at my mother, waiting for the punchline. I knew it was coming. Cynthia leaned over my chair, placing a hand on my shoulder in a gesture that looked maternal, but felt like a physical restraint. She pitched her voice loud enough to ensure everyone in the large dining room heard every single syllable clearly. "We did not forget about you, Natalie," she said, her smile wide and razor-sharp. "But since you are 33, still single, and just an auditor stuck in a cubicle, you really do not need a luxury vacation. You do not have anyone to go with anyway. So we figured a lottery ticket was a much better investment for your situation. Maybe you will win and finally buy yourself a husband." The table erupted immediately. Gregory let out a loud, booming laugh, slapping his knee as if it were the most brilliant comedic timing he had ever witnessed in his entire life. Vanessa giggled behind her expensive wine glass, exchanging a knowing, delighted look with my mother. Even the hired catering staff hovering near the kitchen door seemed to pause, sensing the thick, cruel humiliation hanging heavy in the warm air of the room. DeAndre leaned forward, resting his elbows firmly on the table, pointing his crystal wine glass at me like a weapon. He chuckled, shaking his head slowly. "Do not take it too hard, Natalie," DeAndre said, his tone dripping with thick condescension. "You have always been completely risk-averse. You sit in your little cubicle, checking other people's math, playing it entirely safe day after day. You would probably have a massive panic attack on a European cruise anyway. At least with a scratch-off ticket, the absolute most you can lose is $2. And hey, if you win $5, you can treat yourself to a fancy coffee before your miserable morning commute." The laughter flared up again, louder this time. I did not cry. I did not flinch. I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing any emotional reaction on my face. Instead, the analytical part of my brain, the professional auditor they so openly despised, took over completely. My mind processed the data, stripping away the emotional noise to examine the raw, undeniable facts of their incredible hypocrisy. I looked at my mother, whose diamond necklace caught the bright light of the chandelier overhead. I knew for an absolute fact that she had bought that specific necklace on high-interest credit. I looked at Gregory, laughing so hard, his face was turning red. I knew his business had been bleeding cash for 3 consecutive quarters without any signs of recovery. I looked at Vanessa and DeAndre, celebrating their free $36,000 Mediterranean cruise. 3 years ago, my parents had drained nearly $100,000 from their retirement savings to pay for Vanessa and DeAndre's extravagant wedding ceremony. They had funded the massive ice sculptures, the rare imported flowers, the premium open bar, all to maintain the ridiculous illusion of unlimited generational wealth. Meanwhile, I had navigated harsh reality. I paid off $50,000 in student loans. I accomplished this by living in a tiny studio apartment and working relentless overtime hours for years. I saved every annual bonus and carefully invested my earnings to secure a mortgage on a comfortable, appreciating property in a very good neighborhood. I had zero debt outside of that fixed-rate mortgage. I had an excellent credit score, a robust emergency fund, and a stable career built on merit, not smoke and mirrors. I did not need a man to buy me things, and I certainly did not need my parents to finance my lifestyle choices. Yet in this dining room, my financial independence was viewed as a pathetic failure. Because I did not perform wealth, because I did not demand constant handouts, I was treated as an object of pity and intense ridicule. They needed me to be the loser so they could feel like absolute winners. It was a pathetic, highly transparent dynamic, and seeing it so clearly neutralized any sting their harsh words might have carried. I picked up the $2 lottery ticket and slipped it into my blazer pocket smoothly. "Thank you," I said. My voice was perfectly level. It was devoid of any inflection. It was the exact tone I used when requesting missing receipts from a hostile corporate client. I picked up my fork and took a deliberate bite of my pie. The conversation around me quickly moved on. Vanessa started talking excitedly about the new designer luggage she needed to buy for the upcoming trip. DeAndre loudly debated whether they should upgrade to a private helicopter tour while visiting Greece. Gregory and Cynthia chimed in eagerly, offering to cover the costs of any additional excursions they wanted. They had already forgotten entirely about my gift. I finished my meal in absolute cold silence. I did not participate in the banter. I did not pass the wine. I just observed them memorizing the arrogance on their faces. I excused myself before coffee was even poured, offering a brief polite farewell that barely registered over their loud discussions of Mediterranean excursions. Stepping out of the suffocating heat of my parents' dining room and into the freezing November night felt like waking from a fever dream. A brutal winter storm had rolled in off the lake, blanketing the suburban streets in thick, heavy snow. The wind howled against my heavy wool coat as I hurried to my sedan. I started the engine, waiting for the heater to kick in, and pulled away from the sprawling house without a single glance back in the rearview mirror. The frozen roads were entirely, completely deserted. Whiteout conditions reduced visibility to a few feet, forcing me to grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned a pale shade of white. My car heater blasted dry air against my frozen face, but the chill I felt was entirely internal. The sheer emotional exhaustion of surviving another Thanksgiving with my family weighed on my shoulders like physical lead. I was drained, hollowed out by their relentless need to diminish my existence to elevate their own. 40 minutes into the agonizing drive, the low fuel warning light illuminated on my dashboard. I spotted the flickering neon sign of an old desolate gas station off the next highway exit. The parking lot was empty, covered in untouched snow. I pulled up to the pump, the tires crunching softly against the ice. After filling the tank in the biting wind, I climbed back into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. The sudden silence inside the cabin was deafening. The storm raged outside, throwing snow against the windshield, isolating me completely from the outside world. I reached into my blazer pocket for my keys, and my fingers brushed against the cheap paper of the lottery ticket. I pulled it out and turned on the overhead dome light. The bright, gaudy colors of the Mega Millions scratch-off seemed almost offensively cheerful in the dim, freezing car. It was a $2 insult, a physical manifestation of their absolute disdain for me. A rational person would have torn it to pieces and thrown it out the window. But my auditor brain demanded completion. It was a lingering task. I reached into my cup holder, fishing out a dull silver quarter. I rested the ticket against the steering wheel. I scraped the edge of the coin across the first row of silver coating, clearing away all the metallic dust. The winning numbers were revealed at the top: 7, 14, 22, 49, 61. I moved the quarter down to my numbers, scratching methodically, feeling the slight vibration through my fingertips. The first number appeared: 7. I paused, letting out a sharp puff of air. A small coincidence. I scratched the next circle: 14. My hand hesitated. The scratching sound seemed incredibly loud in the silent car. I pressed the quarter down again, clearing the third spot: 22. My breath caught in my throat. The rational, calculating part of my mind insisted this was merely a statistical anomaly, a random trick of the light, a printing error. I rubbed my eyes hard and stared directly at the cardboard. The numbers remained unchanged. With a sudden jerky motion, I scratched the final two circles in one rapid swipe: 49, 61. A perfect, completely flawless, and totally undeniable match. I moved the quarter down to the prize box located directly beneath the winning row. The silver dust fell away, revealing bold black text: $67 million. I did not scream. I did not cheer or pump my fists in the air. Instead, a profound breath-stealing shock paralyzed my entire body. My lungs seized, refusing to draw in air. My heart slammed against my ribs with terrifying force, beating so fast it felt like a continuous, violent tremor. My fingers went completely numb, dropping the quarter onto the floor mat. I stared at the ticket, my eyes tracing the zeros over and over again, verifying the data, auditing the miracle in front of me. $67 million. A sudden, sharp instinct of vulnerability struck me. I slammed the heel of my hand against the central locking button on the driver door. The heavy mechanical clunk of the locks engaging echoed in the small cabin. I checked the rearview mirror, my eyes scanning the empty, snow-swept parking lot. I was entirely alone, completely unseen, holding a piece of cardboard worth more than the combined net worth of every person sitting in my parents' dining room. The cold realization of absolute financial freedom washed over me, chilling and exhilarating all at once. This was not just money. This was immunity. This was an impenetrable fortress against their control, their judgment, and their toxic manipulation. They had handed me the key to my own liberation disguised as a cruel joke. I carefully placed the ticket inside my wallet, zipped it shut securely, and drove back onto the dark highway. By the time Monday morning arrived, the winter storm had cleared, leaving the city skies a brilliant, icy blue. I walked through the glass doors of my auditing firm at exactly 8 o'clock, scanning my security badge with steady hands. The bustling office floor was filled with the usual Monday chatter about weekend holidays and upcoming corporate audits. I poured myself a black coffee in the break room, nodding politely to my colleagues as they complained about spreadsheets and impending deadlines. I walked to my gray cubicle, the very space my mother had mocked so viciously, and turned on my dual monitors. My demeanor was chillingly calm. I opened a massive spreadsheet containing thousands of financial records, my eyes tracking the data with professional precision. My heart rate was perfectly steady. Beneath my tailored blouse, resting safely against my chest in a secured inner pocket, was $67 million. At precisely 12:15, the minute my scheduled lunch break began, I locked my workstation screen and grabbed my wool coat. I bypassed the crowded office break room and walked straight out the glass double doors of the auditing firm. The crisp, biting winter wind whipped across my face as I hailed a waiting cab, giving the driver an address in the heart of the financial district. I was not heading to a casual lunch. I had a covert high-stakes meeting at one of the most ruthless and prestigious wealth management law firms in the city. The firm occupied the top 3 floors of a towering steel and glass skyscraper designed to intimidate. I bypassed the main reception desk and took the private executive elevator, my heels clicking with measured rhythm against the polished marble floor. A perfectly groomed assistant ushered me immediately into a sprawling corner office featuring panoramic views of the frozen city skyline. Oliver was waiting. He was a senior partner, a man whose hourly billing rate likely matched what used to be my monthly salary. He specialized exclusively in shielding ultra-high net worth individuals from predatory taxes, frivolous lawsuits, and most importantly, greedy relatives. Oliver stood up, buttoning his tailored suit jacket, and gestured toward the heavy leather chair opposite his massive oak desk. We had spoken very briefly on a secure phone line that morning, but he still looked at me with a healthy dose of professional skepticism. People claim to have stumbled into unexpected wealth all the time. I did not waste a single second on pleasantries or small talk. I reached into my coat, retrieved the hard plastic protective sleeve I had purchased earlier that morning, and slid it smoothly across the polished wood. The scratch-off ticket sat perfectly centered between us. Oliver leaned forward, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. His sharp eyes darted from the validation barcodes to the matching symbols, and finally locked onto the prize amount. The professional skepticism vanished from his face, instantly replaced by the intense predatory focus of a top-tier attorney evaluating a massive asset. He did not ask how I felt about winning. He did not offer hollow emotional congratulations. He recognized immediately that this was a pure business transaction. "I need absolute, impenetrable anonymity," I stated, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. As an auditor, I know exactly how fast money destroys families. I am fully aware of our state lottery commission rules. They mandate that a winner must be publicly disclosed. However, I want to aggressively exploit the legal loophole regarding limited liability companies. We are going to establish a blind trust immediately. You will register a corporate entity named NG Horizon LLC. That specific LLC will legally claim the winning ticket. The public record will only ever show your law firm as the registered corporate agent. My personal name will not exist on any public document, any press release, or any state registry. Oliver nodded slowly, steepling his fingers as his mind raced through the complex legal architecture required to execute my demands. "We can absolutely facilitate that structure," he said, his voice low, measured, and precise. "I will draft a comprehensive operating agreement containing multi-layered non-disclosure clauses. NG Horizon LLC will function strictly as a shell company. Directly behind that corporate shell, we will establish an irrevocable blind trust. You will serve as the sole financial beneficiary, but my law firm will act as the official trustee on all public-facing paperwork. This creates an aggressive legal firewall. If anyone from the press or the public tries to dig into NG Horizon LLC, they will hit a massive brick wall at my reception desk. They will never find your true identity." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the desk, slipping fully into my professional auditing mindset. I outlined the next critical phase of my financial demands. The funds must be dispersed into staggered high-yield accounts, spread across 3 entirely separate banking institutions. I want independent tax auditors retained solely by your firm to double-check every single wire transfer for compliance. There can be absolutely zero digital footprint connecting those massive new accounts to my current modest banking profile. Furthermore, I will continue working my regular corporate job. Nothing in my daily routine changes. I cannot show any sudden shift in behavior or spending habits. Oliver typed rapidly on his encrypted desktop terminal, locking in the strict parameters of our agreement. "The State Lottery Commission will automatically withhold 24% off the top for federal taxes," he explained, turning his monitor slightly so I could see the projected spreadsheets. "We will strongly advise opting for the immediate lump sum cash payout rather than the annuity. After calculating the highest possible tax bracket deductions, both state and federal, you are looking at a net deposit of approximately $40 million in liquid cash. I can have the LLC fully incorporated and registered with the state by 3 o'clock this afternoon. We will secure the physical ticket inside our firm vault right now." I watched him stand up, walk over to a heavy steel safe embedded in the wall behind his desk, and input a complex digital code. He slid the plastic sleeve containing my ticket into a reinforced metal drawer and locked it securely. The transition of power was officially complete. The vulnerability of carrying that ticket was gone. I stood up, adjusting my coat and checking my watch. The entire meeting had taken exactly 42 minutes. We had built an invisible, impenetrable financial fortress. My identity was completely buried behind layers of corporate jargon and attorney-client privilege. I shook Oliver's hand, feeling the cold reality of my new power solidifying in my chest. I left the luxury office building and hailed another cab to return to my cubicle, fully prepared to quietly audit other people's money while waiting for my newly hidden empire to clear the bank. The ride back to my corporate office took less than 15 minutes, but the atmosphere inside had shifted dramatically. I swiped my security badge at the front turnstile. A red light flashed. Access denied. I frowned, trying the plastic card a second time. Another harsh red flash accompanied a sharp buzzing sound. Before I could ask the receptionist for a temporary pass, my department manager approached from the lobby. Her face was set in a rigid expression. She did not offer a greeting. She simply gestured toward the secure hallway leading to the executive suites, telling me to follow her immediately to human resources. I walked behind her, my mind calculating possible scenarios. We bypassed my gray cubicle entirely. Two security guards stood near my workstation holding empty cardboard boxes. The murmurs of my colleagues died down instantly as we passed. We entered a sterile, windowless conference room deep inside the department. The firm chief compliance officer and the head of human resources were already seated at the long table. They did not invite me to sit down. The compliance officer, a man who built his career on catching corporate fraud, slid a heavy manila folder across the polished table. It stopped inches from my hands. "We have spent the last 4 hours conducting an emergency internal review of your recent portfolio audits," the compliance officer stated, his voice completely devoid of warmth. "What we discovered represents a catastrophic breach of fiduciary duty. You are terminated effective immediately. We are seizing your corporate laptop, freezing your professional accounts, and preparing a mandatory report for the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding missing client funds." I stared at the thick folder, my heart rate remaining surprisingly steady. The shock of being fired was instantly overshadowed by my deeply ingrained professional instincts. An auditor does not panic when presented with a discrepancy. An auditor examines the raw data. I opened the folder, ignoring the sharp protest from the Human Resources Director. I flipped through the printed spreadsheets, my eyes scanning the complex columns of margin trading accounts, risk assessments, and quarterly compliance sign-off sheets. I looked for the specific corporate entity I was supposedly protecting. The name printed at the top of every falsified document was Vanguard Apex Brokerage. My breath caught hard in my dry throat. Vanguard Apex Brokerage was the exact financial firm where my brother-in-law, DeAndre, worked as a senior portfolio manager. I stared at the numbers, the reality clicking into place with terrifying precision. Millions of dollars in client funds were completely missing from his specific department. The ledgers showed massive, catastrophic losses from highly leveraged margin trades. To hide the bleeding, someone had actively manipulated the quarterly risk assessment reports to bypass regulatory scrutiny. My digital signature and unique employee identification number were stamped across every single fraudulent approval form. I leaned closer to the documents, catching glaring inconsistencies their rushed review had missed. The timestamps on the digital approvals showed the files were signed late on a Sunday night when I was miles away without secure network access. The routing numbers for the offshore accounts did not match corporate protocols. This was an inside job executed by someone with intimate access to my personal schedule, employment details, and professional routine. DeAndre had actively sabotaged my files. He manipulated the audit trail to use me as the unsuspecting scapegoat for his own massive financial crimes. He was drowning in debt from his reckless trading, losing millions of dollars of client money, and he needed a fall guy to throw to the federal regulators. He chose the quiet, unmarried sister-in-law, whom the family already viewed as a pathetic loser. He knew my parents would never question his integrity, and he figured a mid-level auditor lacking resources would be easily crushed by a corporate legal team. You did not verify the IP addresses on these digital signatures, I stated calmly, looking directly at the compliance officer. If you pull the network logs, you will see that these approvals originated from an external server, not my secure terminal. I did not sign these documents. I am being framed by the portfolio manager at Vanguard Apex Brokerage. The human resources director scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. We are not here to debate your conspiracy theories, she said coldly. The digital footprint leads directly to your credentials. You facilitated the concealment of massive financial losses. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings. Do not attempt to access any corporate systems. We reserve the right to pursue civil damages depending on the outcome of the federal investigation. A week ago, this exact scenario would have completely destroyed my world. I would have been crying, begging for my job, terrified of the impending legal bills, and facing total financial ruin. I would have been crushed under the weight of a federal investigation with no money to defend myself. But today, the threat of civil damages felt like a hollow, pathetic joke. I was not a helpless cubicle worker anymore. I was a woman holding $40 million in liquid cash, backed by one of the most ruthless wealth management attorneys in the entire city. I closed the folder and pushed it across the table. I did not argue further. Arguing with mid-level management was a waste of time. I needed to assemble my legal defense and launch a counteroffensive to decimate DeAndre. I turned around and walked out of the room flanked by the security guards. I packed my personal items into a small cardboard box, ignoring the staring eyes of my former coworkers. I handed my security badge to the guard and walked out of the building into the freezing winter air. DeAndre thought he could destroy my life to save his fraudulent empire. He thought I was weak. As I pulled out my cell phone to call my parents, my mind was calculating exactly how to dismantle his entire existence. I stood on the icy pavement outside the towering corporate plaza, clutching the small cardboard box that held the pathetic remnants of my 9-to-5 career. The bitter wind bit mercilessly through my wool coat, but I barely registered the freezing temperature. I pulled out my cell phone, my fingers numb, and dialed my parents' home number. I genuinely believed that despite our incredibly toxic history discovering that DeAndre had committed federal wire fraud and actively framed their own daughter for a felony would finally shatter their blind, unwavering loyalty to him. I thought self-preservation and a basic sense of morality would finally override their bizarre obsession with his fake wealth. My mother, Cynthia, answered on the third ring. I did not waste time with pleasantries or gentle introductions. I told her bluntly that I had just been fired and escorted out of my building by security guards. I explained clearly and precisely that DeAndre had falsified audit reports, bypassed strict regulatory compliance, and forged my digital signature to cover up massive margins of missing client funds. I waited for the sudden gasp of horror. I waited for her to ask if I was going to jail or if I needed a lawyer. Instead, I heard a heavy, intensely irritated sigh. Cynthia did not express a single ounce of concern for my physical safety, my legal liability, or my completely shattered career. She immediately yelled for my father, putting the phone on speaker so they could both berate me simultaneously. Gregory demanded I repeat my wild accusations. I laid out the stark financial facts again, explaining exactly how DeAndre was operating a desperate illegal scheme and using my professional credentials as a human shield against the looming wrath of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The silence on the other end of the line was brief. Then the gaslighting hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Gregory scoffed, his voice dripping with absolute, unfiltered disgust. He makes millions. Why would he frame a mid-level auditor? You sound completely delusional. Cynthia chimed in, her tone shifting rapidly from irritated to viciously cruel. We knew you were incredibly bitter about the luxury cruise ticket, but accusing your own brother-in-law of a federal crime is a new low even for you. Stop being jealous of your sister's husband. He is a senior portfolio manager handling elite accounts you could only dream of touching. You probably made a stupid, careless mistake in your little cubicle, and now you are desperately trying to blame a highly successful man to save your own skin. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, the phone pressed hard against my ear, listening to the people who were supposed to protect me actively throw me to the wolves. They were willfully choosing his fraudulent facade over my actual freedom. They were perfectly willing to let me take the fall for a massive federal crime, just so they could keep bragging about their wealthy son-in-law at the exclusive country club. They needed his illusion of success to validate their own shallow lives. Gregory delivered the final crushing blow with zero hesitation. You have embarrassed this family for the last time. Do not come back to this house until you apologize to DeAndre. The line went dead. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, a flat, mechanical sound that perfectly mirrored the sudden vast emptiness expanding in my chest. I lowered the phone slowly. Any lingering, pathetic hope that my family would ever love, respect, or protect me evaporated completely into the thin winter air. For 33 years, I had endlessly craved their validation. I had played by the rules, worked tirelessly, and stayed out of trouble, desperately waiting for them to finally see my worth. But looking at the dark screen of my phone, I realized the absolute truth. They did not care if I went to a federal penitentiary. They did not care if my entire life was completely destroyed and my reputation ruined forever. They only cared about maintaining the flawless illusion of their own superiority. The total devastation I felt did not manifest as tears. It did not break me down into a sobbing mess. Instead, it hardened into pure, calculated ice. The emotional, approval-seeking daughter died permanently on that freezing sidewalk. The ruthless apex predator they had inadvertently created took her place immediately. I dropped my cardboard box directly into a nearby trash can, abandoning my old compliant life completely. I hailed a passing cab and gave the driver the address for Oliver's downtown law firm. I did not need to cry. I needed a secure war room. When I walked back into Oliver's sprawling, glass-walled corner office, he took one look at my hardened expression and immediately knew the situation had escalated far beyond a simple lottery claim. I sat down at the heavy oak desk and demanded the final trust documents. Oliver slid the thick stack of legal paperwork across the polished wood without saying a single word. I picked up the expensive fountain pen he offered. I did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. I signed my name rapidly and forcefully across the dotted lines, legally transferring the winning ticket into the impenetrable vault of NG Horizon LLC. Oliver stamped the documents, officially activating the blind trust and severing my public ties to the money. The State Lottery Commission would process the payout within 48 hours. I leaned back in the luxurious leather chair, feeling the raw, undeniable power of 40 million liquid dollars backing my very next move. The revenge plot officially began right there in that towering glass room. DeAndre wanted a financial war, and my parents had eagerly chosen his side. I was going to meticulously audit their entire existence, and I was going to leave them with absolutely nothing. They had vastly underestimated the quiet auditor they abused, and they would surely pay the heavy price. I left Oliver's office and immediately checked into the topmost penthouse suite of the luxury hotel under the corporate umbrella of NG Horizon LLC. The suite was a sprawling expanse of black marble floor-to-ceiling glass and cold modern architecture. It cost $5,000 a night, and I booked it for an entire month without blinking. I dropped my cheap winter coat on a velvet sofa and walked directly to the massive windows overlooking the financial district. I was no longer an employee. I was an entity. The transformation required an operational base and a team that moved as fast as my newly acquired capital. I called Oliver and gave him authorization to spare absolutely zero expense. I needed a private intelligence firm. I needed former federal agents, top-tier forensic accountants, and cybersecurity experts who specialized in dismantling fraudulent empires. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the penthouse had been transformed into a fully functioning command center. 6 encrypted desktop monitors were arranged across the massive mahogany dining table. Wires snaked across the expensive rugs. Oliver walked through the double doors, accompanied by a tall, sharp-eyed man, introduced as Harrison. Harrison was a former investigator for the Department of Justice who had transitioned into the highly lucrative private sector. He brought a team of 4 silent, focused analysts who immediately unpacked their laptops and connected to my secure network. I stood at the head of the table wearing a tailored black blazer I had ordered directly to the suite. I poured a cup of black espresso and looked at the team of professionals whose hourly rates would have previously bankrupted me in a single afternoon. Now they worked exclusively for me. I set my coffee down and addressed the room. I do not care about legal red tape, I stated, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. I do not care how many bribes you have to pay to informants or how many private databases you need to access. You have unlimited funding. I want Vanguard Apex brokerage torn apart down to the subatomic level. Specifically, I want the complete, unredacted financial history of a senior portfolio manager named DeAndre. I want his margin calls, his offshore wire transfers, his deleted emails, and his hidden ledgers. I need undeniable proof that he has been siphoning client funds and using falsified digital signatures to bypass regulatory compliance. I want the exact timeline of his financial ruin. Harrison nodded slowly, taking out a sleek tablet. My team can backdoor the brokerage's internal routing system by noon, he said confidently. We have contacts inside the Compliance Oversight Board who can flag his specific trading license for a shadow review. If he is running a deficit and hiding it through forged audits, we will find the bleeding accounts. I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the table. Do not just find them, I commanded. I want you to trace every single dollar he lost. I want to know whose money he stole and exactly how desperate he is. But DeAndre was only the first target. I turned to the second forensic accountant, a woman rapidly typing lines of code. I have a second objective, I continued. I need a comprehensive asset strip of my parents, Gregory and Cynthia. I want their tax returns, their credit card statements, their personal loans, and their bank balances. I want to know the true status of their primary residence. They portray themselves as suburban elites drowning in generational wealth. I know they are hemorrhaging cash. I want to know exactly who owns their debt. The team did not ask personal questions. They did not care about the toxic family dynamics or the emotional abuse I had endured. They operated purely on financial incentives, and I was paying them handsomely to be ruthless. The pacing of the room immediately accelerated into a blur of high-speed data extraction. Money bought unprecedented access. Firewalls that would take local law enforcement weeks to subpoena were bypassed in a matter of hours through paid informants and aggressive corporate espionage. I paced the length of the penthouse, watching the data flow across the glowing monitors. I was operating entirely from the shadows, wielding the immense power of my blind trust. By mid-afternoon, the physical transformation of my life was matching my new financial reality. A personal stylist I had hired arrived with racks of high-end designer clothing. I discarded every cheap mass-produced outfit I owned. I dressed in sharp, structured silhouettes, dark colors, and premium fabrics. I slid on a pair of designer heels that clicked sharply against the marble floor. I looked in the floor-to-ceiling mirror and saw an unrecognizable woman. The timid, desperate daughter who had begged her parents to love her was completely gone. The quiet auditor who had cowered in her cubicle had been eradicated. I was a multi-million-dollar corporate force. I was an untouchable apex predator watching my prey blindly walk into a slaughterhouse. As evening approached, the frantic typing of the analysts began to yield massive results. The speed of the operation was intoxicating. Documents began printing from the portable laser printer in the corner of the room. Harrison handed me a thick stack of papers detailing the initial findings. The raw data confirmed my darkest suspicions and then magnified them tenfold. I took the files and walked back to the glass window, looking down at the tiny cars navigating the frozen streets below. I held the absolute destruction of my entire family in my hands. The intelligence gathering phase was nearly complete, My wealth had provided the ultimate weapon, and I was meticulously preparing to pull the trigger. They had cast me out into the cold, demanding an apology to a criminal. I smiled a dangerous, humorless smile as I reviewed the ledgers. The hunt had officially begun, and I was now holding every single piece of the required live ammunition. Harrison dropped a thick black binder onto the absolute center of the massive mahogany table. He did not smile at all. The fluorescent light from the monitors caught the sharp angles of his face as he tapped the cover of the dossier. The grand illusion of DeAndre is now officially dead. Harrison stated, his voice a low, gravelly hum in the quiet penthouse. We easily cracked the core internal ledger at Vanguard Apex Brokerage. Your brother-in-law is not a Wall Street prodigy. He is a desperate, completely broke criminal standing directly on a massive financial landmine. I opened the binder, my eyes immediately scanning the highlighted columns of data. As a highly trained auditor, numbers speak to me with absolute, undeniable clarity. The printed spreadsheets laid out a clear, catastrophic tale of endless greed, extreme financial leverage, and inevitable total ruin. DeAndre had not just lost a few bad trades in the market. He had knowingly incinerated millions of dollars in a spectacular display of truly staggering professional incompetence. The financial mechanics of his downfall were entirely predictable, but shocking in their sheer scale. DeAndre had built his arrogant persona by trading on margin, essentially borrowing massive amounts of money from his brokerage to amplify his bets on highly volatile tech and cryptocurrency derivatives. For a brief period, the market favored him, feeding his massive ego and funding the luxury cars and $36,000 Mediterranean cruises. But the market always corrects itself. When the tech sector experienced a severe rapid downturn 3 quarters ago, his leveraged positions collapsed instantly. The brokerage issued immediate margin calls demanding he deposit millions in cash to cover his catastrophic trading deficits. DeAndre did not have the cash. His personal bank accounts were virtually empty, drained by his relentless need to fund a lavish fake lifestyle to impress my status-obsessed parents. Faced with total financial ruin and the immediate loss of his career, DeAndre panicked. Instead of liquidating his remaining assets and taking the loss, he crossed a massive legal line. He began operating a localized illegal micro-Ponzi scheme right under the nose of his compliance department. Harrison pulled up a complex flowchart on the main monitor, tracing the movement of illicit funds. DeAndre started targeting new vulnerable clients, pulling in unaccredited investors and retirement accounts. When these new clients wired their life savings into Vanguard Apex Brokerage for conservative wealth management, DeAndre commingled the funds. He illegally diverted their incoming capital to pay off the margin calls on his older bleeding accounts. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul on a massive scale, directly violating federal laws regarding the strict segregation of client assets. He created fake digital statements for the new clients showing steady fabricated returns while their actual money was already gone, swallowed entirely by his massive trading debts. But a micro-Ponzi scheme is a ticking time bomb. The math never balances. DeAndre knew he was running out of fresh capital to steal. Worse, the Securities and Exchange Commission had recently flagged Vanguard Apex Brokerage for a randomized compliance sweep. An external audit was imminent, and his fraudulent ledgers would not survive a basic regulatory stress test. He needed a foolproof distraction. He needed a scapegoat to absorb the devastating impact of the federal hammer. He chose me. I flipped to the final section of the binder, looking at the exact mechanics of my termination. DeAndre had utilized his high-level administrative clearance to access the firm corporate network. He spoofed my IP address and routed his ledgers through my specific compliance portal. He forged my audit signature on dozens of fake risk assessment approvals. By doing so, he legally validated his phantom assets, making it look as if an independent third-party auditor had verified the missing funds and signed off on the offshore routing numbers. He framed me to buy himself a few months of breathing room, hoping I would be crushed by the corporate lawyers before I could ever mount a proper defense or trace the digital breadcrumbs back to his terminal. I stared at the forged signatures, tracing the lines of his betrayal. The sheer audacity of his crime was breathtaking. He had eagerly sacrificed my career, my freedom, and my entire future just to delay his own inevitable imprisonment. He sat at my parents' Thanksgiving table, mocking my cubicle job, knowing full well he had already forged the documents that would get me fired the very next week. Harrison leaned against the table, his arms crossed over his chest. "We have the exact server logs showing his terminal accessing your portal," Harrison confirmed. "We have the wire transfer receipts, proving the commingling of funds. We have everything. The federal charges alone will put him away for decades. Wire fraud, securities fraud, grand larceny. DeAndre is looking at exactly 20 years in a federal penitentiary. The evidence is absolutely bulletproof." I closed the heavy black binder, the sound echoing across the silent room. The picture was now painfully clear to everyone present. DeAndre was a complete fraud, a hollow shell of a man masquerading as a financial genius. And my parents worshipped him. They defended him blindly, choosing his fabricated wealth over their own daughter's integrity. They eagerly expelled me into the freezing winter night to protect a desperate criminal who had actively tried to send me to prison. I placed both hands flat on the smooth mahogany surface, absorbing the immense gravity of the data before me. My anger evaporated entirely, replaced by a terrifying calm that chilled my blood. I looked directly at Harrison, feeling the weight of the $67 million fortifying my absolute resolve. "Prepare the comprehensive dossier for immediate federal submission," I instructed, my voice cutting through the air like a surgical blade. "But do not send it to the authorities just yet. I want to hold this powerful execution order in my own two hands. I am going to watch him bleed first." Harrison did not flinch at the coldness in my voice. He nodded, acknowledging the brutal directive. He reached into his leather briefcase resting against the mahogany table and produced a second folder. This one was considerably thinner than DeAndre's massive dossier, bound in stark red cardboard. He slid it across the polished surface. It stopped perfectly aligned with the edge of the table right in front of me. "Your parents." Gregory and Cynthia Harrison announced, his tone shifting from corporate espionage to forensic accounting. "We ran the comprehensive asset strip just as you requested. The results are frankly startling. I expected to find an upper-middle-class couple living slightly beyond their means. What we actually uncovered is a financial disaster of epic proportions." I opened the red folder. My eyes immediately locked onto the top summary sheet. As an auditor, I have reviewed thousands of distressed portfolios. I have seen bankruptcies, corporate liquidations, and massive asset seizures. But looking at the personal financial architecture of my own parents, I felt a sharp, cynical laugh threaten to break through my icy composure. The numbers were not just bad, they were completely catastrophic. The sprawling suburban fortress with its cathedral ceilings and custom crown molding the very house they used to judge my modest apartment was nothing more than a hollow, heavily leveraged illusion. I flipped to the second page, scanning the real estate records pulled directly from the county clerk database. The truth about the $36,000 Mediterranean luxury cruise ticket hit me instantly. Gregory had stood at the head of the Thanksgiving table, booming with pride, presenting that gift as a grand gesture of generational wealth. He had acted as if writing a check for a European vacation was merely pocket change. The forensic data proved otherwise. The cruise was not purchased with cash. It was not funded by successful business quarters or smart stock dividends. Gregory and Cynthia had taken out a predatory, high-yield second mortgage on their home just to afford that single vacation. They had literally borrowed against the roof over their heads at an astronomical interest rate to buy a luxury cruise for Vanessa and DeAndre. "Why would they do this?" I asked aloud, my eyes tracing the brutal amortization schedule. "Why take out a subprime loan at 12% interest for a vacation?" Harrison leaned against the table, analyzing the psychological profile hidden within the bank statements. "Because they are absolutely desperate to maintain the facade," he explained calmly. "Your parents believe DeAndre is a Wall Street titan. They are terrified of looking inferior to his supposed wealth. They are actively funding a fictional lifestyle to ensure Vanessa remains married to what they perceive as a gold mine. They are bleeding themselves dry to keep up with a phantom millionaire." The irony was staggering. It was a perfect self-destroying circle of absolute fraud. My parents were taking out predatory loans to impress a son-in-law who was simultaneously stealing from his own clients to cover catastrophic margin calls. Both sides of the Golden family were completely broke, desperately trying to scam each other into believing the illusion of endless prosperity. I turned to the next section of the red folder detailing their unsecured consumer debt. The list of active credit accounts was staggering. 6 different platinum tier credit cards were completely maxed out. They were paying the minimum monthly balances by taking cash advances from other high-interest credit lines. The exclusive country club membership they bragged about constantly was being funded by a rolling line of personal credit. The imported truffles and artisanal turkey we ate at Thanksgiving were likely purchased on a card carrying a 29% annual percentage rate. Their entire existence was a carefully balanced house of cards, waiting for a single gust of wind. But the final page of the dossier contained the most critical piece of intelligence: the ticking time bomb that would bring their entire false reality crashing down to the earth. I stared at the bold red text stamped across the official bank correspondence. The primary mortgage on their suburban home was currently 90 days past due. 90 days. In the banking world, 90 days of delinquency triggers a hard, irreversible legal mechanism. The primary lender had already issued the final notice of default. The grace periods were entirely exhausted. The bank was actively initiating formal foreclosure proceedings. Within a matter of weeks, the local sheriff's department would arrive at their front door to serve the eviction notice. Their sprawling suburban fortress was going to be seized, boarded up, and auctioned off to the highest bidder. I looked up from the documents, gazing out the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite. The city below moved at a frantic pace, oblivious to the absolute power I now held. My parents had banished me from their home, telling me I was a jealous, bitter failure who was not welcome back until I apologized to a criminal. They had cast me out into a blinding snowstorm to protect a house that they did not even truly own anymore. A sharp strategic plan began to formulate in my mind. The bank wanted to offload the toxic debt. My parents were drowning, completely unaware that their wealthy son-in-law was about to be indicted by the federal government and could not possibly bail them out. They were utterly defenseless. I turned back to Harrison, closing the red folder. "I need you to contact Oliver immediately," I commanded, my voice devoid of any hesitation. "Tell him we are moving to the next phase of the operation. I want the exact contact information for the commercial debt restructuring officer at my parents' primary bank. NG Horizon LLC is going to make an aggressive all-cash offer to purchase that specific bundle of distressed debt. We are going to buy the mortgage." Harrison raised an eyebrow, a flicker of genuine respect crossing his face. "I want that debt," I repeated, my voice leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or debate. "I want NG Horizon LLC to become the sole legal owner of their primary mortgage." Harrison did not argue. He immediately picked up his encrypted phone and dialed Oliver's direct line. I listened as he relayed my exact instructions detailing the specific bank, the loan numbers, and the current distress status of the property. The conversation was brief and highly technical. Harrison ended the call and looked at me with a grim professional nod. "Oliver is initiating contact with the commercial debt restructuring officer right now. He expects minimal resistance from the bank." The strategy was brutally effective because it capitalized on the banking sector's inherent desire to mitigate losses. When a mortgage falls 90 days past due and hits the final stages of default, the primary lender considers it a toxic asset. The bank does not want to go through the lengthy, expensive process of foreclosure, eviction, and property auction if they can avoid it. They prefer to offload the bad debt to private equity firms or specialized debt buyers, often at a significant discount, just to get the red ink off their balance sheets. NG Horizon LLC, backed by $40 million in liquid cash, was an ideal buyer. We were swooping in to purchase the distressed paper, instantly bypassing the bank's entire foreclosure headache. Oliver called me directly less than 2 hours later. I answered the phone standing by the penthouse window, watching the afternoon light fade across the frozen city. "We have a preliminary agreement," he stated, his voice crisp and efficient. "The bank is highly motivated to offload the entire portfolio containing your parents' mortgage. They offered a package deal, but I successfully negotiated the surgical extraction of just that specific deed of trust. We are purchasing the debt at 85 cents on the dollar. The bank is thrilled to recover the capital without the legal fees of a foreclosure. I will have the final contracts couriered to your suite by 5 o'clock this evening." The reality of the transaction settled into my mind with absolute clarity. I was not just buying a house, I was buying total, undeniable leverage. I was securing the physical manifestation of my parents' massive ego. For decades, they had used that sprawling suburban house as a weapon to make me feel small. They hosted their lavish parties there, parading Vanessa and DeAndre around the custom kitchen, while I was relegated to the corner, treated like an embarrassing afterthought. They had stood on that very porch and banished me into a blizzard, demanding an apology to a criminal. Now, by the stroke of a pen, I was going to legally own every single brick, every square foot of hardwood flooring, and the very ground beneath their feet. Promptly at 5 o'clock, a courier arrived at the penthouse suite. Harrison took the heavy envelope, verified the seals, and handed it directly to me. I walked over to the mahogany dining table, pushing aside the scattered forensic reports to clear a space. I opened the envelope and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. The paperwork was dense, filled with banking jargon and transfer clauses, but the core mechanism was simple. The original bank was assigning all rights, titles, and interests in the mortgage directly to NG Horizon, LLC. The transfer included the original promissory note and the deed of trust. I picked up my pen and began signing the documents. I signed my name rapidly, methodically, authorizing the massive wire transfer from my blind trust to the bank. With every signature, I felt another chain of my past breaking away. I was actively dismantling the power dynamic that had defined my entire existence. I reached the final page, the assignment of the deed of trust. I stared at the names printed on the legal document. Gregory and Cynthia, the borrowers, the debtors, the people who had gleefully handed me a $2 lottery ticket to mock my financial stability. I signed the final line, pressing the pen hard enough to leave an indentation on the paper beneath. I handed the completed documents back to Harrison, who immediately scanned them into the secure network and dispatched the physical copies back to Oliver. The wire transfer was initiated instantly. It will take approximately 48 hours for the county clerk to officially record the assignment, Harrison informed me, checking his monitor. Once that happens, NG Horizon LLC is the undisputed legal creditor. You hold the note. You hold the deed. If they miss their next payment, and we know they cannot make it, you have the absolute legal right to initiate immediate foreclosure and eviction proceedings. I walked back to the window, looking out at the glittering skyline. The snow had started falling again, swirling in the wind, illuminated by the streetlights below. The city looked cold, unforgiving, and beautiful. I felt a profound sense of calm wash over me. The anxiety, the desperate need for validation, the constant fear of disappointing them, it was all completely gone. I had surgically removed their power over me and replaced it with my own. I now held the deed of trust to the house I was banished from. I was their direct creditor. They were living on my property, breathing my air, entirely dependent on my mercy. And I had absolutely zero mercy left to give. The trap was fully set. The explosive charges were wired and ready. All I had to do now was wait for the inevitable moment when their carefully constructed world collided with the brutal, undeniable reality of their financial ruin. They thought they had expelled the weak link from their family. They had no idea they had just handed the keys to their entire kingdom to the very person they had spent 33 years trying to destroy. The wait lasted exactly 3 days before the fortress cracked. I was sitting at the mahogany dining table in the penthouse, reviewing the final restructuring documents for the mortgage debt, when my encrypted phone buzzed. It was Oliver. He did not bother with a greeting. His voice was clipped, carrying a rare note of genuine irritation. "We have a containment breach," Oliver stated flatly. A low-level clerk at the State Lottery Commission accepted a cash bribe from a sleazy local tabloid reporter. They could not penetrate the blind trust or bypass the corporate shell of NG Horizon, LLC, but the clerk managed to leak the foundational routing metadata. They cross-referenced the initial claim date with recent corporate terminations in the financial district. The tabloid just published the story online 5 minutes ago. I stood up, abandoning the mortgage paperwork, and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city below looked identical to the day before, but the invisible barrier separating me from my past had just been violently shattered. "Send me the link," I commanded. My phone pinged instantly. I tapped the URL and watched the webpage load. The tabloid site was cluttered with aggressive advertisements and sensationalist banners, but the main headline dominated the center of the screen in massive, bold black letters. "Fired local auditor claims $67 million Thanksgiving jackpot." I scrolled down the article, my eyes scanning the text with cold precision. The reporter had clearly lacked the resources to pierce Oliver's expensive legal firewalls, so they relied heavily on aggressive circumstantial evidence and sensationalized corporate gossip. The article did not explicitly print my full legal name, but the identifying details were painfully specific. The piece described a 33-year-old financial auditor who was recently terminated from a prominent downtown accounting firm amid a highly controversial compliance investigation involving Vanguard Apex Brokerage. The timeline presented in the article perfectly aligned the Thanksgiving holiday weekend with the exact date the winning ticket was purchased at that desolate highway gas station. The author heavily implied that the anonymous winner had utilized an elite wealth management firm to establish a blind trust to hide the massive windfall from former employers and estranged family members. It was a masterful piece of cheap tabloid journalism, blending pure speculation with undeniable facts to create a viral sensation. I watched the live view counter on the webpage tick upward at a terrifying speed. 10,000 views, 50,000, 100,000. The story was gaining explosive traction across local social media networks. It was being shared in corporate chat rooms, financial forums, and neighborhood gossip groups. The anonymity I had purchased with my new wealth was rapidly disintegrating right before my eyes. I closed the browser app and stared at the dark screen of my phone. For a fleeting second, the luxury suite was perfectly silent. Then the digital avalanche began. It started with a single sharp chime, a push notification from a professional networking app. A former coworker had tagged my profile in a link to the article. Before I could swipe the notification away, a second chime echoed through the room, then a third, then a rapid, continuous cascade of electronic sounds erupted from the device in my hand. Ping, ping, ping. The screen lit up in a blinding frenzy of activity. My email inbox icon updated with terrifying speed, jumping from 0 unread messages to 50, then 100. Former colleagues who had completely ignored me while security escorted me out of the building were suddenly sending frantic, overly friendly emails. "Hey Natalie, is this article about you?" Call me people I had not spoken to since high school were messaging me on every available platform. The phone began to vibrate violently, a steady, relentless shaking, as incoming calls flooded the line. Unknown numbers from local area codes flashed on the screen, likely desperate reporters trying to score an exclusive interview. I muted the volume, but the visual assault continued. The screen was a chaotic, flashing mess of push notifications, direct messages, and calendar alerts. The sheer volume of digital noise was overwhelming, a stark contrast to the absolute pristine isolation I had carefully cultivated since buying the distressed debt. I watched the battery percentage drop as the processor struggled to handle the massive influx of data. And then the notifications I had been truly waiting for finally arrived, the ones that signaled the beginning of the end. A text message popped up on the banner bypassing the unknown numbers. It was from Cynthia. It was not a question. It was a frantic, desperate demand. "Natalie, answer the phone right now," immediately after a message from Gregory arrived. The audacity of his text was staggering. "Call your father immediately. We need to discuss family security." Then Vanessa's name flashed across the screen, her message dripping with manufactured panic. "Sister, please tell me this news is real. I am crying." The ultimate betrayal arrived a second later. A text from DeAndre, the man who had actively framed me for a federal crime, the man who had tried to send me to prison to save his own miserable life, was suddenly reaching out. "Hey, sister-in-law, we need to talk strategy. Call me." The profound silence of my luxury suite was completely irrevocably shattered by the very people who had discarded me into a blizzard just weeks prior. They had proudly banished me from their lives, explicitly telling me I was a jealous failure who was not welcome back. Now fueled by the scent of $67 million, they were violently clawing at the gates, desperate to reclaim the daughter they had abused. I stared at the flashing phone in my hand, a cold, humorless smile touching my lips. I did not answer a single message. I simply locked the screen, grabbed my designer coat, and walked toward the penthouse elevator. It was time to face the monsters. I stood in the center of the penthouse living room, staring at the chaotic, flashing screen of my phone. The digital assault was relentless, a continuous barrage of push notifications and ringing alerts. I took a slow, deep breath, centering myself in the quiet luxury of the suite, and tapped the voicemail icon. I needed to hear their exact angles. I needed to hear the precise tone of their sudden, miraculous change of heart. The first voicemail was from Cynthia. I pressed play and brought the speaker to my ear. "Natalie, my sweet girl." Cynthia's voice crackled through the speaker, breathless and high-pitched, laced with aggressive, performative sobbing. "I just saw the news online. Oh my God, I am crying right now. I knew it. I just knew my little $2 gift would bless you. I prayed for a miracle for you, and it happened. Please, honey, call me back immediately. We need to open some champagne and celebrate as a family. We miss you so much." I deleted the message before she could finish the final sentence. The sheer, unadulterated delusion was staggering. She was actively attempting to claim credit for my $67 million windfall. She was framing her cruel, humiliating insult at the Thanksgiving dinner table as a benevolent maternal blessing. The next voicemail was from Gregory. His tone was drastically different, lacking the fake emotion of my mother, but heavy with authoritative entitlement. "Natalie, this is your father. I need you to call me the absolute second you get this message. Do not speak to anyone else. Do not sign any financial documents, and do not hire any cheap lawyers. We need to lock this down and discuss family security immediately. I have some major business contacts who can help us manage this situation. Call me back." I deleted his message with a sharp swipe of my thumb. His arrogance remained entirely intact. He assumed I was a helpless, clueless amateur who desperately needed his brilliant business acumen. The same business acumen that had driven his own primary residence into active foreclosure. I switched over to my text messages. DeAndre's name was at the very top of the list. I opened the thread and read his shameless, predatory pitch. "Hey, sister-in-law, unbelievable news. So happy for you. Listen, you are going to need aggressive wealth management fast. My firm has an exclusive VIP fund, currently yielding a guaranteed 20% return. I can get you past the velvet rope and waive the management fees since we are family. Call me. We need to strategize." I stared at the text, a cold, humorless laugh escaping my chest. DeAndre was currently under active federal investigation for massive wire fraud. He had actively framed me to save his own sinking ship, and now knowing he was totally broke, he was trying to run his illegal micro-Ponzi scheme directly on me. He wanted to steal my lottery winnings to cover his catastrophic margin calls. I locked my phone, silencing the continuous barrage of alerts. They were predictable, desperate, and entirely transparent. I walked over to the closet, pulled out a heavy cashmere coat, and grabbed my keys. I had anticipated this exact reaction, and I knew exactly what they would do next when I did not answer their frantic calls. They would physically track me down. I left the penthouse suite and took the private elevator down to the secure parking garage. I drove across the city, navigating the familiar plowed streets toward my old apartment building. I had not slept there since hiring the investigative team, but my name was still on the lease and my family knew the address. I parked my sedan down the street and let myself into the modest brick building. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my unit and unlocked the door. The apartment was exactly as I had left it, neat, practical, and unassuming. I did not turn on the main lights. I simply sat on the edge of the sofa in the dim afternoon shadows waiting. I did not have to wait long. Less than 40 minutes later, the heavy sound of footsteps echoed loudly in the exterior hallway. I heard the distinct muffled voices of my parents arguing quietly, followed by Vanessa's sharp tone. A loud, aggressive pounding shook my front door. "Natalie." It was Cynthia, her voice muffled through the wood. "Natalie, open up. We know you are in there. I saw your car parked down the street." The pounding intensified, rattling the cheap brass doorknob. "Come on, sis, open the door," Vanessa yelled, her voice dripping with fake excitement. "We brought champagne. We want to celebrate with you." I stood up from the sofa, smoothing the front of my tailored coat. I walked slowly and deliberately to the front door. I did not check the peephole. I unfastened the deadbolt, turned the handle, and pulled the door wide open. My family stood crammed together in the narrow, poorly lit hallway. Cynthia was holding a cheap bottle of sparkling wine adorned with a gaudy gold ribbon. Gregory stood tall, trying to project paternal authority, while Vanessa held a plastic grocery bag filled with plastic champagne flutes. DeAndre hovered in the back, wearing an expensive suit, flashing a wide, predatory smile. For a split second, they all froze, their eyes widening as they took in my appearance. I was not wearing my usual cheap office attire. I was dressed in premium structured designer clothing, projecting a cold, untouchable aura. "Oh my God, Natalie!" Cynthia shrieked, recovering quickly and lunging forward with her arms outstretched. "We are so incredibly happy for you." I stepped back sharply, raising one hand flat and firm, stopping her advance instantly. The sudden rejection shocked the entire group into silence. Cynthia's arms dropped to her sides, her fake smile faltering. "What is wrong, honey?" Cynthia asked, trying to mask her irritation. "We came all this way to celebrate your amazing news. We are family." I looked at their eager, greedy faces. I saw the pure desperation hiding just beneath their forced smiles. They were looking at me, but all they saw was a massive walking bank account, ready to solve all their catastrophic financial failures. I looked directly into Cynthia's eyes, my expression completely blank, devoid of any warmth or familial connection. I thought I was not allowed in the family until I apologized to DeAndre. I stated my voice cold, precise, and absolute. The silence in the hallway was deafening. Gregory's jaw tightened. Vanessa looked confused. DeAndre's fake smile vanished completely. I did not wait for them to formulate a lie or a gaslighting defense. I stepped back inside my apartment and slammed the heavy door directly in their faces. The sharp, violent crack of the wood hitting the frame echoed loudly in the stairwell. I engaged the deadbolt, sliding it into place with a definitive click. They had shown up expecting a joyful, forgiving reunion. I gave them a locked door and a brutal reminder of their own toxic rules. The heavy wood of the front door vibrated against my back as I leaned against it, listening to the muffled chaos exploding in the hallway. My family had expected a tearful, grateful reunion, complete with cheap champagne and immediate access to my bank accounts. Instead, they were staring at a locked door and the brutal realization that their control over me was permanently severed. For a few seconds there was stunned silence. Then the shouting began. Cynthia's voice pierced through the wood, shrill and frantic. "Natalie, open this door right now. You cannot do this to us. We are your family." I heard Gregory's heavy fist slam against the door, the impact echoing loudly in the small apartment. "Don't be a fool, Natalie," he barked, his authoritative tone, failing to mask the raw desperation beneath it. "Open the door so we can discuss this like adults. We have serious financial planning to do." Vanessa chimed in, her voice bordering on hysteria. "Mom, what is she doing? Why won't she open the door? We need that money." DeAndre's voice cut through the panic, smooth and commanding. Let her cool off. She is just being dramatic. She will come around when she realizes she needs us to manage this kind of capital. Let's go. We will handle this strategically. I listened to their retreating footsteps, the heavy thud of Gregory's shoes, the frantic clicking of Cynthia's heels, and the angry muttering of Vanessa. They retreated down the 3 flights of stairs, the heavy exterior door of the apartment building slamming shut behind them. I exhaled a slow, controlled breath, pushing away from the door. I walked to the center of the dim living room, the space feeling suddenly charged with electric tension. The physical confrontation had ended, but the psychological warfare was just beginning. My phone, resting on the coffee table where I had abandoned it earlier, began to vibrate violently. The silent screen lit up, illuminating the dark room with a rapid succession of incoming calls. They had retreated to their cars, realizing physical force would not work, and were now pivoting to aggressive digital manipulation. I did not answer. I watched the screen flash with Gregory's name, then Cynthia's, then DeAndre's, followed by a barrage of text messages that scrolled too fast to read. I walked into the small kitchen, poured a glass of cold water, and stood by the window looking down at the street. I watched my parents' luxury sedan pull away from the curb, its tires spinning aggressively on the icy pavement. DeAndre's expensive sports car followed closely behind. They were gone, but the assault was far from over. I returned to the living room, picked up my phone, and deliberately opened the voicemail app. I needed to document their exact demands. I needed to map their strategy. I tapped the first new voicemail marked from Gregory. His voice crackled through the speaker, the initial shock having mutated into pure, unfiltered rage. Natalie, I do not know what kind of game you think you are playing, but it ends now. You listen to me very carefully. That lottery ticket was a gift from your mother purchased with my money. Legally and morally, that ticket is a family asset. We are demanding 50% of the total payout. That is $33.5 million payable immediately to Vanessa and DeAndre. They have a massive tax burden to clear, and it is your duty to support your sister. Do not make me involve lawyers. You owe this family everything you have. Call me the second you hear this. I deleted the message with a swift swipe of my thumb. The sheer breathtaking audacity of his demand was almost comical. He had banished me from his home, told me I was a failure, and now he was aggressively demanding half of my net worth because he had given his wife $2 to buy a joke gift. He was attempting to extort $33 million to bail out the son-in-law who had just tried to send me to a federal penitentiary. The level of delusion required to formulate that demand was staggering. I tapped the next voicemail. This one was from DeAndre. The smooth, predatory tone he had used in his previous texts was completely gone. His voice was low, sinister, and laced with absolute panic. Hey, sister-in-law, let's cut the crap. I know what you did. I know you routed those files, but here's the reality. I am a senior portfolio manager at a major brokerage, and you are a fired, disgraced mid-level auditor. I have deep industry contacts across the entire financial sector. If you do not agree to Gregory's terms and wire that money to my offshore accounts by tomorrow morning, I will personally guarantee that you never work in finance again. I will make sure the SEC investigation buries you. You need me to fix this. Be smart, Natalie. Transfer the funds. I saved that voicemail directly to a secure cloud folder, creating a digital backup for Oliver. DeAndre was so blinded by desperation, so terrified of the impending federal audit, that he had just left a recorded threat of extortion and blackmail. He was actively threatening to destroy my career if I did not fund his illegal micro-Ponzi scheme. He was handing me the exact ammunition I needed to annihilate his entire existence. The conflict had officially reached a boiling point. They were no longer just a toxic family demanding obedience. They were a desperate syndicate attempting a hostile takeover of my wealth. I walked over to the modest desk in the corner of the room, opened my encrypted laptop, and initiated a secure video call with Harrison. His sharp face appeared on the screen almost instantly, the dark command center visible behind him. The family just attempted a doorstep ambush. I reported, my voice calm and analytical. They failed. They have now escalated to aggressive extortion. Gregory is demanding $33 million for Vanessa, and DeAndre has left recorded threats of professional sabotage if I do not comply. Harrison nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as he processed the intelligence. They are panicking, he observed. The walls are closing in on DeAndre, and your parents' foreclosure is imminent. They view your sudden wealth as their only lifeline. They will become increasingly unpredictable. I leaned closer to the camera, the cold logic of the auditor overriding any lingering familial emotion. Let them panic, I commanded. Accelerate the timeline. I want the final restructuring documents for my parents' mortgage finalized by morning, and I want DeAndre's fraudulent ledgers packaged for the federal authorities. We are not just defending our position, Harrison. We are going to execute a total financial decapitation. The first digital strike came exactly 2 hours after my parents had ambushed my door. I was still in the penthouse command center reviewing the timeline of DeAndre's fraudulent margin calls with Harrison when my personal phone buzzed. It wasn't a call. It was a barrage of text messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to since childhood and family friends who had never once asked how I was doing. "How could you do this to your parents?" one message read. "You are a monster, Natalie. They raised you," another stated bluntly. I ignored the messages and opened Instagram. Vanessa had struck. Her latest story was a masterclass in performative victimhood. She sat in the front seat of DeAndre's luxury sports car, looking disheveled, a deliberate choice given her usual obsession with a flawless aesthetic. Tears streamed down her face, catching the light as she held the camera close, speaking directly to her thousands of followers. "I didn't want to talk about this," she sobbed, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. "But my family is going through something unimaginable. My sister, someone we've always loved and supported, has completely abandoned our parents. She came into a massive, life-changing amount of money, and instead of helping the people who raised her, she locked her door in their faces. My parents are struggling, and she's just gone. It's toxic, it's greedy, and it's breaking our hearts." She didn't name me. She didn't name the amount of money. She didn't mention the Thanksgiving insult, the $2 ticket, or the fact that she and DeAndre had just tried to extort $33 million from me. It was a carefully crafted narrative designed to manipulate public sympathy and cast me as the cold, heartless villain who had betrayed her loving, sacrificing family. The video had already been viewed tens of thousands of times. Comments flooded in praising Vanessa's bravery and condemning the anonymous, greedy sister. Harrison looked up from his monitor, observing my expression. "The narrative warfare has begun." He noted, his tone analytical. "They are trying to leverage social pressure to force a concession." "Let them," I replied, setting the phone down. "Public opinion is irrelevant when you hold the deed to their house and the evidence of their federal crimes." But the assault didn't stop at Instagram. Vanessa quickly escalated to TikTok, posting a series of vague, tearful videos about toxic family dynamics and the pain of financial abuse. She painted a picture of our parents as aging, vulnerable victims who had sacrificed everything for an ungrateful daughter. She even implied that I had somehow stolen the money, hinting at dark secrets and unethical behavior. The digital mob mobilized. My LinkedIn profile was flooded with hostile messages. The firm where I had just been fired was bombarded with emails demanding they investigate my fraudulent windfall. The tabloid article gained even more traction, fueled by the relentless social media outrage. "They are attempting character assassination," Oliver said, having joined the call from his office. "It's a desperate tactic, but it can be damaging. We could issue a cease and desist or release a carefully worded public statement." "No," I commanded, my voice flat. "We do not respond. We do not engage with their theatrics. A response validates their narrative. It gives them the attention they crave. We stick to the plan. They are digging their own graves. We just need to hand them a bigger shovel." I watched the social media metrics climb, studying the data with the detached precision of an auditor examining a failing ledger. Vanessa was overplaying her hand, drunk on the immediate validation of her followers. She didn't realize that every tearful video, every vague accusation was just more evidence of their desperation, More proof of the toxic dynamic I was systematically dismantling. My phone continued to buzz with hostile messages from extended family. "Your father is sick over this, Natalie," my Aunt Susan texted. "You need to make this right. You're dead to us." A cousin I barely knew messaged. I blocked every number methodically, severing the digital ties to the family that had never truly valued me. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "The final restructuring of your parents' mortgage is complete," Harrison announced, breaking the quiet. "NG Horizon LLC is now the sole legal creditor. The deed of trust is secured." "Excellent," I said, a slow, dangerous smile finally touching my lips. "And DeAndre's file, ready for submission to the SEC and the FBI," Harrison confirmed. "We have the wire transfer receipts, the forged audit logs, the internal communications. It's a closed case." "Hold it," I instructed. "We don't send it until the trap is fully sprung." I walked back to the window, the city lights reflecting off the glass. Vanessa could have her TikTok sympathy. My parents could have their manufactured victimhood. DeAndre could have his hollow arrogance. They were fighting a war of perception, oblivious to the fact that I had already won the war of reality. The stage was set, the explosive charges were wired. All that remained was the final devastating confrontation. I picked up my phone and drafted a single concise email to Oliver. "Initiate Phase 3, I wrote. "Send the invitation." Within minutes, Oliver's office dispatched a formal legal summons to Gregory, Cynthia, Vanessa, and DeAndre. It was an invitation to a family mediation and asset division settlement to be held at Oliver's elite downtown law firm. The email specifically instructed them to bring all relevant financial records and legal representation. It was the bait they couldn't resist. They would see the words asset division settlement and assume I had caved to the pressure. They would believe their aggressive tactics had worked, that I was terrified of the public backlash and willing to pay them off to disappear. They would walk into that boardroom expecting a surrender. They had no idea they were walking into an execution. The very next morning, my prediction about their escalating desperation was proven absolutely correct. I was standing in the kitchen of the penthouse pouring a cup of dark roast coffee when Harrison walked through the double doors holding a thick manila envelope. His expression was a mixture of professional disgust and deep amusement. He tossed the package onto the marble counter. "A process server just attempted to deliver this to our corporate lobby downtown," Harrison explained. Oliver intercepted it. "Your parents have officially escalated from social media tantrums to outright legal harassment." I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of poorly formatted legal documents. It was a formal civil summons. The plaintiff line listed Gregory and Cynthia, along with Vanessa, as a secondary injured party. The lawyer representing them was a man named Vince Caldwell. A quick background check on my encrypted tablet revealed that Caldwell was a bottom-tier personal injury attorney who operated out of a strip mall and was currently facing 2 separate malpractice complaints from the State Bar Association. He was a desperate, sleazy ambulance chaser who had clearly taken their case on a wild contingency fee, blinded by the scent of a $67 million payout. The actual allegations in the lawsuit were so legally baseless they bordered on comedic. Caldwell had drafted a complaint accusing me of the theft of family assets and a blatant breach of an implied familial contract. The document aggressively argued that because the $2 scratch-off ticket was purchased with Gregory's money and handed to me at a family dinner, the resulting jackpot was a joint venture. They were legally demanding a court-ordered freeze on my assets and a mandatory redistribution of the wealth. It was a completely frivolous, legally illiterate intimidation tactic designed to terrify me into a quick cash settlement. Oliver called in via video link from his corner office, shaking his head as he reviewed the digital copy of the summons. "I could have this entire complaint dismissed by a judge before lunch," Oliver stated confidently. "Caldwell has absolutely zero standing. The State Lottery Commission rules are incredibly clear regarding the physical possession of winning tickets. This is a blatant shakedown attempt. We can file a countermotion for legal harassment and force Caldwell to pay our attorney fees." I looked at the ridiculous legal threat resting on the counter. A standard dismissal would simply send them scurrying back to their social media accounts to play the victims. A dismissal would not deliver the fatal crushing blow required to end this war permanently. I did not want them to fade away. I wanted them utterly destroyed. Do not file a motion to dismiss, I commanded, my voice cold and precise. We are going to use their own pathetic lawsuit against them. We are going to accept their premise. Send a formal legal reply to Vince Caldwell immediately. Tell him that my client is terrified of the negative public exposure and the impending legal battle. Tell him that I am completely overwhelmed and ready to surrender. We will use the invitation we drafted yesterday as our official response. I am agreeing to a comprehensive family mediation and asset division settlement. Oliver smiled, catching the lethal rhythm of my strategy. You want them to walk into my boardroom believing they have forced your hand. Exactly, I replied. But add a strict non-negotiable stipulation to the mediation agreement. The settlement offer is only valid if every single adult member of the family is physically present. That specifically includes DeAndre. Furthermore, Caldwell must instruct them to bring all of their current banking records, mortgage statements, and corporate ledgers to facilitate the so-called asset division. Tell them I am ready to cut the checks, but my legal team requires complete transparency to process the massive payouts. Oliver ended the call to draft the response. Within 2 hours, the trap was officially set and accepted. Harrison monitored the digital fallout. Through a combination of public social media tracking and the legal correspondence flowing between Oliver and Caldwell, we watched my family take the bait completely. They did not just bite the hook, they swallowed it whole. Vanessa immediately posted a new update on her Instagram. She was sitting in her lavish living room holding a cup of coffee and smiling triumphantly at the camera. The truth always comes to light, she told her followers, her voice dripping with fake humility. My family has been through a living nightmare this week, but justice is finally being served. Thank you all for supporting us while we fight to get back what was stolen from our parents. The arrogance was staggering. She genuinely believed her pathetic internet campaign had broken me. According to the boastful emails Caldwell was sending to Oliver, Gregory, and Cynthia were already celebrating their massive victory. They were operating under the delusion that their sleazy lawyer had terrified my elite wealth management firm into a hasty surrender. They were probably sitting in their foreclosed suburban home drinking expensive champagne purchased on a maxed-out credit card, entirely convinced that they had outsmarted me. DeAndre was the most predictable of them all. He eagerly confirmed his attendance for the mediation, completely blinded by the promise of an immediate cash injection. He believed his threatening voicemail had worked, that I was paying him off to keep his mouth shut, and that the millions he was about to receive would magically wipe away his federal crimes and save him from the impending regulatory audit. They were all celebrating a magnificent life-changing win. They were totally oblivious to the cold, hard reality waiting for them. I spent the rest of the evening preparing the physical evidence. I organized the thick forensic binders, placing DeAndre's catastrophic trading logs into one folder and my parents' tragic financial ruin into another. I printed the deed of trust for their home on heavy premium paper. I laid out my wardrobe for the following morning, a tailored charcoal gray suit that projected absolute authority. I was not dressing for a family reunion. I was dressing for an execution. The countdown had officially begun, and tomorrow I would burn their fraudulent empire to the ground. The doors to the 40th floor boardroom swung open precisely at 10 o'clock the next morning. The room itself was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a dizzying, unobstructed view of the city skyline, but the true focal point was the massive slab of polished black marble that served as the conference table. I sat completely still at the head of the table, wearing my tailored charcoal gray suit, my hands resting lightly on the cold stone. To my immediate right sat Oliver, looking perfectly at ease in his bespoke navy suit. Standing behind me, positioned like immovable statues, were Harrison and another former federal investigator, both wearing severe dark suits and earpieces. They projected an aura of absolute silent authority. The heavy glass doors slid open and my family paraded into the room. Their collective arrogance was a tangible, almost suffocating force. Gregory walked in first, his chest puffed out, wearing a suit that was 10 years out of date, but freshly dry cleaned for the occasion. Cynthia followed closely behind him, clutching a designer handbag that I knew was purchased on a maxed-out credit card. She surveyed the luxurious boardroom with a hungry, entitled gaze, practically drooling at the display of immense wealth. Vanessa strutted in next, holding her phone up to record a quick video of the high-end office before slipping it into her pocket. She wore a smug, victorious smile. DeAndre walked alongside her, exuding a desperate kind of bravado, his eyes darting quickly toward the silent men standing behind my chair before returning his focus to me. Finally, Vince Caldwell, their bargain basement attorney, sauntered in. He carried a battered leather briefcase and wore a cheap, shiny suit that stood out painfully against the sophisticated backdrop of Oliver's firm. They absolutely did not wait to be seated. They did not even wait for introductions. Caldwell marched directly to the center of the marble table, snapped open his briefcase, and pulled out a thick stack of stapled documents. He slapped the paperwork down onto the table with a loud, aggressive smack. "We are not here to waste time," Caldwell announced, his voice carrying a raspy, unprofessional edge. "My clients have drafted a final settlement agreement. In exchange for dropping the pending litigation regarding the theft of family assets, and in consideration of the immense emotional distress your client has caused, we are demanding an immediate lump sum transfer of 80% of the total lottery winnings. We are also requiring a signed non-disclosure agreement, preventing your client from discussing this family matter publicly." I did not flinch. I did not look at the contract. I kept my eyes locked on Gregory. He leaned his hands on the table, leaning forward to loom over me, completely oblivious to the trap closing around him. "You should never have let it get to this point," Natalie, Gregory barked. "You humiliated us. You locked your own mother and father out in the hallway like common criminals. We gave you life. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. That winning ticket was purchased with my money handed to you at my Thanksgiving table. You thought you could just take our asset and leave us with nothing. Did you really think we would just roll over and let you steal from us? You are going to sign that document today, or we will drag your name through every courtroom and newspaper in this state." Cynthia stepped up right beside him, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. "You have always been incredibly selfish," she shrieked, abandoning her fake internet victim persona. "You were always jealous of your sister. You were always bitter. Vanessa found a successful husband while you were stuck in your cubicle. When you won that money, your very first instinct should have been to secure your family. Instead, you acted like a greedy monster. We had to find out through a trashy tabloid. You owe us for the public humiliation you caused. You owe Vanessa for trying to ruin her peace of mind." Vanessa crossed her arms over her chest, stepping into the spotlight. "Do you have any idea how much stress you caused me this week?" Vanessa complained. "I had to go on social media just to defend my parents from your toxic behavior. My followers were completely shocked when they found out what you did. You tried to abandon the people who literally sacrificed everything for you. You owe me a massive apology, and you owe us that money. We actually know how to manage wealth properly. You would just hoard it in a bank account and do absolutely nothing with it. We deserve to enjoy the lifestyle that money can provide." DeAndre could not resist joining the pile, and completely blinded by his desperate need for my cash. "Look at you sitting there acting like a corporate boss," DeAndre sneered. "You are a fired auditor, Natalie. You got caught messing with my compliance reports, and now you are playing the big shot because you got lucky. If you do not sign that transfer today, my network will permanently blackball you. You will never get another job in this industry. I can make one phone call and ensure the SEC tears your entire life apart. You need to pay us and walk away before you destroy yourself completely. We hold all the cards here. We have the lawsuit, the public, and the legal leverage to take everything you have. Sign the paper right now." I sat perfectly still, allowing the total weight of their immense hubris to fill the sprawling glass room. The absolute silence that followed DeAndre's final command was heavy and suffocating. They stood there panting slightly from their aggressive theatrical performance, genuinely believing they had finally broken my spirit and secured their massive fortune. I took a slow, deep breath, looking at each of their eager faces, methodically preparing to strike. I did not even glance at the predatory settlement contract Vince Caldwell had thrown onto the polished marble table. It was entirely irrelevant. Instead, I lifted my right hand and gave a single sharp nod to Harrison. He stepped forward with a heavy thud, placing a massive 500-page binder directly in front of me. I placed my fingertips against the thick black spine and shoved it forcefully across the smooth surface. The heavy binder slid across the vast expanse of the conference table and stopped precisely 2 inches from DeAndre's clenched fists. He looked down at it, a flicker of genuine confusion finally breaking through his arrogant facade. Gregory scoffed, crossing his arms defensively. "What is this garbage?" Gregory demanded. "We are not here to read your paperwork. We gave you our terms. Sign the settlement." I kept my eyes locked exclusively on DeAndre. "That is your entire life in 500 pages, I stated, my voice echoing like a crack of thunder in the quiet room. "That is a comprehensive forensic audit of your career at Vanguard Apex Brokerage. I highly recommend you open it, DeAndre. It details exactly how your fake financial empire collapsed." DeAndre let out a loud, forced laugh, but his eyes darted nervously toward his lawyer. "You are bluffing," he sneered. "You do not have the clearance or the intelligence to audit my elite portfolio. You are a fired cubicle worker trying to scare me with a stack of blank paper." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, my auditor instincts fully engaged. "Open the binder," I commanded. "Let us talk about your elite portfolio. Let us talk about the catastrophic margin calls you faced 3 quarters ago when the tech sector experienced a rapid, severe downturn. Let us discuss how your highly leveraged derivative positions completely imploded, leaving you owing your brokerage millions of dollars in cash that you absolutely did not have." DeAndre's face went slack. The color completely drained from his cheeks. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Cynthia looked back and forth between us, her manufactured outrage momentarily paused by the sudden shift in the room's power dynamic. "What is she talking about?" Vanessa asked, her voice losing its smug edge. "Tell her she is crazy." He did not answer. He was staring at the black binder as if it were a live explosive device. I did not stop. I maintained the relentless clinical pressure. "Since you did not have the capital to cover your massive losses, you panicked." I continued, my words slicing through the silence. "You decided to cross a massive federal line. You started operating a localized, illegal micro-Ponzi scheme right under the nose of your own compliance department. The forensic data in that binder proves that you targeted new, vulnerable clients. When they wired their retirement savings into Vanguard Apex Brokerage for conservative management, you illegally commingled the funds. You diverted their incoming capital to secretly pay off the bleeding margins on your older failing accounts. You robbed Peter to pay Paul on a spectacular scale." Caldwell, the cheap lawyer, suddenly took a step back from the table. His eyes widened as the legal implications of my words registered. He recognized the specific terminology of federal securities fraud. DeAndre finally slammed his hand down on the binder, attempting to muster some pathetic remnant of his former arrogance. "You cannot prove any of this," he stammered, his voice shaking noticeably. "This is defamation. I will sue you for everything you have. You do not have the server logs. You are making wild accusations because you got fired for incompetence. You got fired because you signed off on offshore routing numbers that violated regulatory compliance." I smiled a cold, merciless smile. "You are absolutely right about the compliance failure," I acknowledged smoothly. "But you are completely wrong about the signatures. You knew the Securities and Exchange Commission was initiating a randomized compliance sweep of your brokerage. You knew your fraudulent ledgers would not survive a basic regulatory stress test. You needed a foolproof distraction to buy yourself time, so you utilized your high-level administrative clearance to access the firm network. You spoofed my IP address. You routed your toxic ledgers through my specific compliance portal, and you forged my digital signature on dozens of fake risk assessment approvals to use me as your unsuspecting scapegoat. You plan to send your own sister-in-law to a federal penitentiary just to delay your inevitable imprisonment? I stated the absolute truth, hanging heavy and undeniable in the air. Gregory tried to intervene, his voice lacking its previous booming authority. Now wait a minute, Natalie. These are serious allegations. DeAndre is a respected professional. He makes millions. He does not make millions, I snapped, cutting my father off completely. He is completely broke. His personal accounts are empty. He has been funding his luxury cars and your $36,000 Mediterranean cruise with stolen client money. He is a desperate common thief. DeAndre grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. His breathing became shallow and rapid. A thick layer of sweat formed on his forehead. You think you are so smart? He gasped, wiping his brow with a trembling hand. You think you can just hire some private investigators to intimidate me? I will destroy this fake audit. I will shred this binder. I will make sure my legal team buries you in civil court until you beg for mercy. You have absolutely nothing. You are a paranoid, fired loser trying to play a corporate game you do not understand. My legal team will tear you apart. I cut him off. I sent this exact file to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI at 8 o'clock this morning. Those two men by the door are federal agents. You have a warrant out for wire fraud. DeAndre collapsed, sweating and hyperventilating. Vanessa screamed. The piercing, high-pitched scream, tearing from Vanessa's throat, echoed violently against the thick glass walls of the boardroom. It was not a scream of heartbreak or concern for her husband. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated panic as the reality of her collapsing social status hit her with the force of a freight train. She stared at the thick black binder, then at the two federal agents stepping away from the door, and finally at DeAndre, who was slumped in his chair gasping for air like a dying fish. Vanessa did not drop to her knees to comfort the man she had married. She did not grab his hand or offer words of support. Instead, she turned on him with the vicious, feral instinct of a cornered animal. Her perfectly manicured hands curled into fists as she lunged at him, slapping his chest and shoulders. "You lied to me!" Vanessa shrieked, her face contorted in absolute rage. "You told me you were a genius. You told me those cars were paid for. You bought my jewelry with stolen retirement funds. You are nothing but a broke, pathetic criminal. How am I supposed to show my face at the club? You completely ruined my life." DeAndre did not even try to defend himself. He simply sat there staring blankly at the polished marble table, utterly defeated by the crushing weight of the federal indictment waiting for him. Harrison gave a sharp, subtle nod to the two agents. They moved forward with practiced, synchronized efficiency. They bypassed the screaming wife, grabbed DeAndre by his expensive suit jacket, and hauled him forcefully to his feet. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed sharply over Vanessa's hysterical sobbing. The agents read him his rights in a flat, monotone voice, turning him around and marching him directly out of the glass double doors. DeAndre did not look back. His fraudulent empire was officially dead. Vince Caldwell, the bargain basement attorney my parents had hired, watched the federal agents drag his star witness out of the room. A look of sheer professional terror washed over his sweaty face. He realized instantly that he had just attempted to extort a woman backed by limitless capital on behalf of a federal criminal. Caldwell snapped his battered leather briefcase shut, abandoning his predatory settlement contract on the table. Without saying a single word to my parents, he practically sprinted out of the boardroom, desperate to distance himself from the impending legal fallout. The heavy glass doors slid shut, sealing me inside the room with the remaining members of my toxic family. Gregory and Cynthia stood frozen, staring at the empty space where their wealthy golden son-in-law had been sitting just moments before. I watched their minds desperately trying to process the catastrophic shift in power. Their golden child was married to a federally indicted thief. Their leverage was completely gone. But the sheer breathtaking audacity of my parents knew absolutely no bounds. In a display of psychological gymnastics that defied all logic, they pivoted instantly. They completely abandoned DeAndre, erasing him from their reality the second he ceased to be a financial asset. Cynthia smoothed the front of her dress, her face miraculously transforming into a mask of beaming maternal pride. She stepped forward, clasping her hands together as if she were greeting me at a pleasant Sunday brunch. "You caught him, honey," Cynthia exclaimed, her voice dripping with sickly sweet affection. "You are so incredibly brilliant. We had absolutely no idea he was running a scam. Thank you for protecting the family from that monster. You truly saved us." Gregory quickly mirrored her delusion, offering a wide, approving smile. "Your mother is exactly right, Natalie. You used your auditor training to root out a criminal. We are incredibly proud of you." He casually reached out and tapped the predatory settlement contract Caldwell had left behind. "Now, since that unpleasantness is entirely handled about the settlement we discussed, we can obviously negotiate the exact percentage, seeing as you did us such a massive favor today." I did not smile back. I looked at their eager, greedy faces, marveling at their endless capacity for manipulation. They genuinely believed they could just wipe the slate clean, shower me with fake praise, and walk out of this building with millions of dollars. They thought throwing DeAndre under the bus would instantly grant them access to my wealth. "Sit down," I commanded. My voice was not loud, but it cut through their fake warmth like a scalpel. Gregory's smile faltered. "Now, Natalie, there is no need for hostility. We are on your side." I said, "Sit down." They slowly sank into the leather chairs opposite me, clearly unnerved by the absolute lack of emotion in my tone. Vanessa remained standing near the window, quietly sobbing over her lost social media clout, entirely ignored by our parents. I turned my clinical auditor's precision directly onto the flawless, wealthy facade my parents had meticulously built over decades. I raised my hand. Harrison immediately stepped forward and placed the thin, stark red folder directly in front of me. "You think you can banish me into a blizzard, demand half of my net worth, and then pretend to be proud parents the second your fraud of a son-in-law gets arrested," I stated, opening the red folder. "You love to talk about financial success. You love to mock my safe cubicle lifestyle. So let us conduct a formal audit of your personal finances, Gregory." I pulled out the top sheet of paper, my eyes scanning the devastating data provided by my investigative team. "Let us talk about the $36,000 Mediterranean luxury cruise you so proudly gifted to Vanessa at Thanksgiving," I began. "You presented that ticket as a grand gesture of generational wealth. But you did not pay cash for that trip. You did not use business dividends. You went to your primary bank and took out a predatory subprime second mortgage on your home at a 12% interest rate. You literally borrowed against the roof over your head just to buy a vacation for a criminal and his spoiled wife, simply to maintain the illusion that you were rich." Gregory's face went completely ashen. He opened his mouth to object, but his voice failed him. Cynthia stared at me in muted horror, realizing I had pierced the veil of their most deeply guarded secrets. I did not stop. I pulled out the next document, slapping it onto the marble table. "Let us talk about your unsecured consumer debt, Cynthia. You have 6 different platinum tier credit cards. Every single one of them is completely maxed out. You have been paying the minimum monthly balances by taking cash advances from other high-interest credit lines. The exclusive country club membership you use to judge other people is currently being funded by a rolling line of personal credit. Your entire existence is a pathetic hollow shell funded by 29% annual percentage rates. You are drowning in debt, desperately trying to keep up with a son-in-law who is stealing from retirees. You have no right to look into our private accounts," Cynthia hissed, her face turning a violent shade of red. "This is an invasion of privacy. It is called due diligence," I replied smoothly. "When you threaten to sue an auditor for $33 million, the auditor examines the plaintiff, and the plaintiff is completely broke." I pulled out the final document from the red folder, the most critical, devastating piece of financial intelligence my team had uncovered. "But the credit cards are just a symptom of the disease. I continued, my voice dropping to a low, lethal cadence. The real problem is your primary mortgage. You are currently 90 days past due on your home payments. The grace periods are entirely exhausted. The bank has already issued the final notice of default. Your sprawling suburban fortress is in active foreclosure. Within weeks, the local sheriff will arrive to throw your designer furniture onto the front lawn. You are homeless, Gregory. You just do not want to admit it yet. The absolute silence in the boardroom was staggering. The arrogant, demanding parents who had marched into this room demanding my fortune were completely annihilated. They were stripped bare, their fake wealth and toxic superiority reduced to a stack of delinquent bank statements on a marble table. I sat back in my chair, watching them absorb the brutal reality of their total financial ruin. They had absolutely nothing left to hide behind. The suffocating silence in the glass boardroom stretched out heavy and absolute. Gregory stared at the stack of delinquent bank statements resting on the polished black marble. The rigid, authoritative posture he had maintained for my entire life was completely gone. His shoulders slumped forward and his chest hitched with short, panicked breaths. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was finally looking down at the jagged rocks below. Beside him, Cynthia was shivering. Her manicured hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles were entirely white. The luxurious designer handbag she had paraded into the room now sat forgotten on the floor, a pathetic symbol of the fraudulent empire they had desperately tried to maintain. Vanessa remained frozen near the window. The tears she had previously shed for her social media followers were completely dry, now replaced by a profound, hollow look of sheer terror. Her wealthy husband was currently sitting in the back of a federal vehicle, and her parents, the ultimate safety net she had always relied upon, were officially destitute. Gregory slowly raised his head. The arrogance that had fueled his demands for $33 million was entirely erased, replaced by a sickening, desperate vulnerability. "Natalie," he whispered, his voice cracking horribly. He cleared his throat and tried again, reaching a hand out across the table. "Natalie, please. You have to help us. You have the money now. You have $67 million. You can call the bank. You can pay off the outstanding balance. If you just clear the arrears, we can keep the house. We can start over. We are your family. We are your parents. You cannot let a bank take our home." I did not reach out to take his hand. I kept my arms perfectly still, resting on the armrests of my leather chair. I looked at the man who had laughed when I was handed a $2 scratch-off ticket. I looked at the man who had banished me into a freezing winter storm. "You fundamentally misunderstand how the commercial banking sector operates," Gregory Fry stated, my voice echoing with clinical icy precision. "When a high-value residential mortgage falls 90 days past due and enters the final stages of default, the primary lender does not want to deal with you anymore. They view your property as a toxic, non-performing asset. They do not want to spend months navigating the messy, expensive legal procedures of foreclosure, eviction, and public auction. Banks prefer to mitigate their losses immediately. They prefer to offload the bad debt to private equity firms or specialized debt buyers at a significant discount, just to wipe the red ink completely off their corporate balance sheets." Gregory blinked, his eyes darting back and forth as his mind struggled to process the complex financial terminology. "I do not understand," he stammered. "What does that mean for the house? Are you saying the bank already sold the house?" I reached into the breast pocket of my tailored charcoal blazer. I withdrew a single crisp sheet of heavy premium legal paper. I placed it flat on the black marble and used 2 fingers to slide it slowly, deliberately across the expansive table. The document glided smoothly over the polished stone and came to a stop directly over his stack of delinquent credit card statements. "I am saying you did not just go into debt," I explained, enunciating every single word with devastating clarity. "Your house was completely foreclosed on. The bank finalized the sale of your distressed debt yesterday afternoon. They sold your primary mortgage, including the original promissory note and the exclusive deed of trust, to a private equity firm. The name of the purchasing entity is NG Horizon LLC." Gregory stared down at the legal document. His eyes scanned the official county clerk stamps, the verified signatures, and the bold text confirming the assignment of the deed of trust. Cynthia leaned over his shoulder, her breath catching in her throat as she read the name of the corporate entity. NG Horizon, LLC. Cynthia repeated, her voice a fragile, trembling whisper. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a sudden, horrifying realization. That is the name the tabloid printed. That is the blind trust. I leaned forward, closing the physical distance between us, ensuring they felt the absolute crushing weight of my final strike. I am the sole owner and primary beneficiary of NG Horizon LLC. I stated, my eyes locking onto Gregory's terrified face. I bought your debt, I hold the note, I own your house. A sharp, strangled gasp escaped Cynthia's lips. She covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes filling with fresh, panicked tears. Gregory sank back into his heavy leather chair, his mouth hanging open in absolute stunned disbelief. The realization crashed into them with the force of a physical blow. The daughter they had mocked, abused, and discarded was now their undisputed legal landlord. They were living on my property, breathing my air, and standing entirely at my mercy. But I had absolutely zero mercy left to give. I picked up the final document resting beside my laptop. It was a standard, legally binding state form printed on bright white paper. I tossed it onto the center of the marble table. It landed with a soft, definitive slap right on top of the deed of trust. You gave me a $2 ticket, I said, delivering the ultimate payoff with chilling, merciless satisfaction. I am giving you 30 days to pack. Ask your golden child for a place to stay. The silence shattered. Cynthia let out a loud, agonizing wail, burying her face in her hands. Gregory grabbed the eviction notice, his hands shaking so violently the paper rattled loudly in the quiet boardroom. No, he yelled, his voice breaking into a desperate, panicked sob. You cannot do this. We have nowhere to go. We have absolutely nothing. Vanessa suddenly lunged forward from the window, screaming at her parents. This is your fault. You told me he was rich. You told me my husband was a genius. You made me marry a criminal. She grabbed Cynthia's shoulder, shaking her violently. Where am I supposed to go? My husband is going to federal prison. You have to fix this. Cynthia shoved Vanessa away, her own panic turning into vicious anger. Do not blame me. You spent his stolen money. You bought the designer bags. You are the reason we are homeless. I did not stay to listen to the rest of their pathetic, self-destroying meltdown. The trap had sprung flawlessly. The execution was completely finalized. I stood up from my leather chair, taking my time. I reached down and methodically buttoned the front of my charcoal gray blazer. I looked at Oliver, who gave me a firm, respectful nod. I turned my back on the screaming, crying, chaotic mess of the people who used to be my family. I walked toward the heavy glass double doors flanked by Harrison and the other federal investigator. The sound of their bitter, desperate fighting echoed behind me as they viciously turned on each other, tearing their toxic relationships apart in a frantic search for someone else to blame. I stepped out of the boardroom, the thick glass doors sliding shut behind me, completely severing the noise. I walked away down the quiet, carpeted hallway of the law firm, leaving them entirely alone to drown in the absolute ruin of their own making. 3 months later, the dust from the catastrophic collapse of my former family had officially settled. I sat at a sleek, minimalist desk in the newly renovated headquarters of my foundation, reviewing the quarterly legal aid budget. The foundation, fully funded by NG Horizon LLC, provided aggressive pro bono financial audits and legal representation for women attempting to escape domestic financial abuse. It was a massive, highly complex operation, and I thrived in it. I was no longer just a corporate auditor checking spreadsheets to protect billionaires. I was actively dismantling the exact kind of financial manipulation that had been used against me for my entire life. The news regarding my family trickled in slowly, mostly through the dry, objective reports Harrison continued to compile. I did not seek out the information for pleasure, but rather to maintain total situational awareness. DeAndre was currently sitting in a federal detention center awaiting trial. He was denied bail. The Securities and Exchange Commission had partnered directly with the FBI using the massive 500-page forensic audit my team provided as the foundational blueprint for their prosecution. DeAndre was facing 20 counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and grand larceny. He was going to spend the next 2 decades in a federal penitentiary. The arrogant, wealthy portfolio manager who had mocked my cubicle job was now wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit stripped of all his tailored suits and expensive watches. Vanessa's spectacular downfall was equally absolute. Without DeAndre's stolen client funds to finance her lifestyle, her entire fake reality completely disintegrated. The federal government seized all of their assets, including the luxury sports cars, the designer jewelry, and the bank accounts. Vanessa was forced to move into a tiny, run-down apartment in a bad neighborhood. Her social media empire collapsed overnight when her followers realized her entire existence was funded by a criminal Ponzi scheme. Harrison's latest report indicated she was currently working a minimum-wage retail job at a local mall, forced to fold cheap sweaters and deal with angry customers just to survive. The golden child had finally been introduced to the brutal, unforgiving reality of the real world. Gregory and Cynthia suffered the most profound public humiliation. I executed the 30-day eviction notice with ruthless, uncompromising precision. The local sheriff's department arrived at their sprawling suburban fortress exactly on schedule, forcing them to pack their belongings into cheap garbage bags and vacate the premises. They were officially homeless. They had to relocate to a cramped, cheap rental apartment on the outskirts of the city. Their exclusive country club memberships were immediately revoked due to non-payment. Their wealthy status, obsessed friends completely abandoned them, horrified by the public spectacle of their eviction and their direct connection to DeAndre's federal indictment. The perfect superior facade they had spent their entire lives building was completely annihilated. They had absolutely nothing left. I closed the financial report on my desk and stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored blazer. My work for the day was complete. I took the private elevator up to the top floor of the building, stepping directly into my new sprawling New York penthouse. The space was breathtaking, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic, unobstructed view of the glittering Manhattan skyline. It was the physical manifestation of total, absolute freedom. I walked over to the custom wine cellar, selected a vintage bottle of red wine, and poured myself a generous glass. I moved slowly toward the expansive outdoor balcony, sliding the heavy glass doors open. The crisp evening air washed over me, carrying the distant, vibrant sounds of the city below. I took a slow sip of the rich wine, leaning against the glass railing. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt or regret. I felt a profound, deep-seated peace that I had never experienced in my entire life. I turned around, looking back into the luxurious living room. Hanging squarely in the center of the main wall, perfectly illuminated by a gallery spotlight, was a small custom-built shadow box frame. Inside the protective glass rested the plain, brightly colored $2 Mega Millions scratch-off ticket. The silver coating was still roughly scraped away, revealing the winning numbers that had completely altered the trajectory of my existence. I looked at that cheap piece of cardboard, my mind tracing the brutal, exhausting journey from that freezing Thanksgiving night to this soaring penthouse balcony. They had handed me that ticket to mock my stability. They had used it to reinforce their own toxic superiority. They genuinely believed I was a pathetic dependent failure who would never escape their control. They thought their conditional love was a prize I would constantly beg for. I took another sip of wine, looking directly at the framed ticket, the final realization settling heavily and beautifully into my mind. They told me that $2 ticket was a joke, a pathetic insult meant for a lonely loser. They thought they were handing me a piece of trash, but they were wrong. It was the absolute cheapest price I could have possibly paid to buy my total, undeniable freedom. They showed me exactly who they were when they threw me into a blizzard, and I simply used their own arrogant, greedy nature to utterly destroy them. They demanded $33 million for a family they had already abandoned. I gave them a 30-day eviction notice instead. Family is not defined by shared DNA or forced holiday dinners. Family is defined by respect, loyalty, and unconditional protection. If people treat you like an expendable asset, you must audit their existence and permanently remove them from your ledger. You do not owe your success, your wealth, or your sanity to the people who actively tried to tear you down. You owe yourself the absolute courage to walk away and build your own empire. I took one final look at the glittering skyline, raising my glass slightly in a silent, solitary toast to the quiet auditor who had finally learned how to become the apex predator. The profound narrative of betrayal and eventual triumph we witnessed highlights a painful but liberating truth. Our self-worth is never dictated by the people who fail to value us, even if those people are our own family. For too long, the protagonist was trapped in a toxic cycle of seeking validation from relatives who only offered conditional love, gaslighting, and relentless criticism. The ultimate act of abandonment, whether being left alone at an airport, excluded from a milestone, or mocked at a family dinner, served as a brutal but necessary catalyst. It shattered the illusion that blood ties automatically guarantee loyalty, protection, or care. The most crucial lesson learned here is that rock bottom can serve as the ultimate foundation for rebuilding your life. When the protagonist was finally stripped of her family's toxic safety net, she was forced to confront her own profound resilience. She learned that true security does not come from accommodating the fragile egos of others or shrinking herself to keep a fake peace. Instead, it comes from the absolute courage to walk away, set impenetrable boundaries, and cultivate a chosen family based entirely on mutual respect and genuine support. The transition from a victim of emotional and financial abuse to an empowered, highly independent individual proves that trauma and rejection do not have to be the end of your story. They can be the exact fuel needed to forge an authentic, fiercely successful life. Ultimately, the story teaches us that we hold the pen to our own narrative. We do not owe our sanity, our loyalty, or our success to those who actively tried to tear us down. Evaluate the relationships in your own life today and have the courage to walk away from any table where respect is no longer being served.